There is a deadline, a non-negotiable, scientifically calculated date for the collapse of an entire ecosystem. January 2023. A team of scientists, led by Dr. Benjamin Abbott at Brigham Young University, issued an emergency warning. Without drastic, immediate intervention, the Great Salt Lake, the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere, would functionally disappear by the year 2028. Not a shortage, not a restriction. Gone. Leaving behind a toxic dust bowl laced with arsenic and mercury, aimed directly at a major American city. This is not a distant climate model. It is a 4-year fuse on an environmental bomb. But here's what they didn't tell you. The Great Salt Lake is not an anomaly. It is a preview. Across the American West, 7 iconic bodies of water are now caught in the same death spiral. From reservoirs that power cities to lakes that once defined entire regions, the water is vanishing faster than any model predicted. So, the real question is, are we witnessing a historic drought, or are we watching the first stage of a man-made apocalypse that we engineered ourselves? What do you believe is the root cause of this crisis? Is it climate change, overpopulation, or century-old water policies that no longer work? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments. I read as many as I can. And let's begin. A surprising number of people who find this information vital forget to subscribe. If you believe these stories need to be told, taking 2 seconds to hit that notification bell is the single best way to support this work. It ensures these warnings are seen by more people, a small click for a massive issue. The problem begins in Utah, at the Great Salt Lake. For most of its history, it was a constant, a vast, shimmering expanse of saline water so large it created its own local weather patterns. Today, more than half of its natural area is gone. The lake has lost 73% of its water and dropped 11 feet since 1850. Most of that loss has occurred in just the last 20 years. The vast exposed lakebeds are not just empty land. They are the accumulation of a century of agricultural and industrial runoff. Arsenic, selenium, mercury, and other heavy metals that were safely diluted in trillions of gallons of water are now sitting on the surface, exposed to the air. Every windstorm that sweeps across the valley now has the potential to pick up this toxic particulate matter and blow it directly into the lungs of the 1.2 million people living in Salt Lake City and the surrounding suburbs. Dr. Benjamin Abbott and his team at BYU were blunt in their 2023 report. The issue is, there is a very, very short fuse on this, and the lake is within just a few years of collapse, he stated. The cause is not a mystery. It's simple math. Decades of diverting the rivers that feed the lake for agriculture and municipal use, combined with a warming climate, have created a structural deficit. More water is being taken out than nature can possibly put back in. Around 65% of the water diverted from the Great Salt Lake Basin goes to one industry, agriculture, specifically for water-intensive crops like alfalfa and hay, much of which is exported overseas. It is the textbook definition of exporting your water supply, one bale of hay at a time. For a moment, it seemed like the warning was being heard. In an unexpected political shift, Donald Trump's 2027 fiscal budget proposal requested over $1 billion to secure the lake's future, an unprecedented federal intervention. But is it too late? Can $1 billion refill a lake that took millennia to form? Or is it just the most expensive dust suppression project in history? The clock to 2028 is still ticking. 400 miles south, a different kind of catastrophe is unfolding, but with the same brutal math. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the 2 largest reservoirs in the United States, are the lifeblood of the American Southwest. They provide water and power to nearly 40 million people across 7 states and Mexico. Both are impounded on the same river, the Colorado, and both are draining at a terrifying rate. The iconic bathtub ring on Lake Mead's canyon walls tells the story, a stark white scar showing how far the water has fallen. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the federal agency that manages these behemoths, has stopped speaking in hypotheticals. Their official projections, released in June 2026, are grim. They forecast Lake Mead's water level to plummet to 1,020 feet by July of 2027. That is 30 feet below its current level. And it's dangerously close to a number that terrifies water managers. 950 feet. That's the minimum power pool threshold, the point at which the water level is too low to turn the turbines at Hoover Dam. Below that, the dam stops generating electricity for millions in Nevada, Arizona, and California. The lights go out. Is this just a natural cycle, or something more permanent and irreversible? Let me know your take in the comments below. But there is a lower number still, 895 feet. That is dead pool. It's not a dramatic term, it's a technical one. It means the water is physically too low to flow past the dam at all. A dead pool Lake Mead means the Colorado River effectively stops flowing south of Hoover Dam. The city of Las Vegas, as we covered in a previous investigation, spent $1.4 billion drilling a third straw to pull water from the very bottom of the lake, below the dead pool line, an act of engineering desperation. And yet, even that tunnel doesn't solve the problem if the river that fills the lake stops delivering. Upstream, Lake Powell is hovering at a catastrophic 24% capacity. What happens at Powell directly determines what happens at Mead. They are two dominoes in the same line, and the first one is already wobbling. The good snowpack of winter 2023 gave a moment of reprieve, a slight bump in water levels that some mistook for recovery. It wasn't. It was a temporary pause in a decades-long decline. The structural deficit, where states are allocated more water than the river actually carries, remains. It's a century-old accounting error, written in 1922, coming due in the 21st century. Then there is the lake that was born by mistake and is now dying by neglect. The Salton Sea, California's largest lake, was created in 1905. It was an engineering disaster. The powerful Colorado River, swollen with floodwaters, breached an irrigation canal and poured into a low-lying desert basin called the Salton Trough. For 2 years, the entire volume of the river flowed into the desert, creating a vast inland sea, an accidental oasis. For decades, it thrived. It became a hotspot for tourism, boating, and sport fishing, a desert riviera. But the Salton Sea has no natural outlet. Water goes in, but it only leaves through evaporation. Over a century, agricultural runoff from the surrounding Imperial Valley, full of pesticides and fertilizers, poured into the lake. With nowhere to go, the salinity skyrocketed and the pollutants concentrated. Today, the Salton Sea is an apocalyptic landscape. The shoreline is littered with the bones of millions of tilapia, fish that could no longer survive the toxic, hypersaline water. The air is thick with the smell of decay. And as the lake shrinks, it is exposing that same toxic lakebed we see in Utah, but with its own unique chemical cocktail. The federal government knows the danger. The Inflation Reduction Act allocated $250 million, $250 million, specifically for dust suppression projects at the Salton Sea. Not to save the lake, but to try and stop the lake from poisoning the millions of people who live in the region, from the Imperial Valley all the way to Los Angeles. That money isn't a solution. It's a bandage on a wound that is only getting deeper. The Salton Sea is a ghost of a lake, a warning of what happens when a water source is abandoned. It's a reminder that sometimes the most expensive problem is the one you ignore. If this is the first time you're hearing about the true scale of this toxic dust threat, hit the like button. Knowledge is the first step, and if you have family in California or Utah, share this video. They have a right to know what is in the air they breathe. Your share could be the warning someone needs. West of the Salton Sea, in the high desert of Nevada, another ghost is forming. Walker Lake. Unlike the Salton Sea, Walker Lake wasn't an accident. It's an ancient terminal lake, a natural jewel in the Great Basin, that for generations was a premier fishing destination. The economy of Mineral County was built on it. Today, the fish are gone. All of them. As upstream agricultural diversions on the Walker River siphoned off its inflow for decades, the lake's water level dropped and its salinity soared. Sometime around 2015, the last native trout died. Tony Ruse, a Mineral County commissioner who has watched this collapse unfold his entire life, put it bluntly. The last fish was caught in 2013 or 2015. When the fish died, the fishing died. Boating, recreation, that all just disappeared. What was once a vibrant blue lake is now described by locals as a sludge pond. The marinas sit high and dry, hundreds of yards from the water's edge, their ramps pointing to a cracked, empty lakebed. The town of Walker Lake is a shadow of its former self. Its economy evaporated along with the water. Organizations like the Walker Basin Conservancy are fighting a desperate battle to buy water rights from farmers and restore flow to the river. But they are competing against a century of established agricultural practice and water law. Walker Lake isn't a story of a future threat. It's the story of a loss that has already happened. It is the tangible, economic, and ecological wreckage that is left behind when a lake dies. It serves as a living obituary for what towns across the West now fear is their own future. A future where the central feature of their community, the very reason for their existence, simply vanishes. You can't build an economy on sludge. You can't run a bait shop when there are no fish. Walker Lake is the quiet, devastating proof. The crisis is not confined to natural terminal lakes. In New Mexico, one of the most important reservoirs on the Rio Grande is in a state of near-total failure. Elephant Butte Reservoir, completed in 1916, was once the largest man-made lake on Earth. It was a monumental achievement of its time, designed to control the wild floods of the Rio Grande and provide a reliable water supply for farms in southern New Mexico and West Texas. In late June of 2026, it held just 4.7% of its conservation capacity, nearly empty. The cause was a brutal combination of factors. A multi-year drought had already depleted the reservoir. Then came the winter of 2026, which produced a meager snowpack in the mountains that feed the Rio Grande. Worse, that snow melted far earlier than ever recorded in 30 years. A sudden warm spell in the spring caused the entire snowpack to liquefy and rush downstream all at once, forcing dam operators to release massive amounts of water to prevent flooding. It was a deluge they couldn't capture, a feast during a famine. In June, the outflow from Elephant Butte Dam was measured at 15 times higher than the inflow from the river. 15 times. The reservoir was bleeding out, hemorrhaging water to meet downstream treaty obligations with Texas and Mexico. John Irizarry, the acting area manager for the Bureau of Reclamation's Albuquerque office, acknowledged the dire situation. Being faced with a third dry year in a row is a big challenge, he said in April 2026, trying to sound confident. But confidence can't create water. The Elephant Butte Irrigation District, which manages water for thousands of acres of farmland, has had its allocations slashed year after year. Farmers are forced to let fields go fallow, to abandon crops, to make impossible choices. The reservoir that was meant to be their salvation has become a symbol of their precarity. When a lake this size drops to 4.7%, it isn't a reservoir anymore. It's a puddle at the bottom of a canyon, a ghost of the water security it once promised. And it's a stark illustration of how a single good snow year doesn't fix a 2-decade-long drought. The system is too broken. The deficit is too deep. I know it's the second time I'm asking, but our data shows a surprising number of you watch these urgent warnings and simply forget. If you've made it this far, the story clearly has you hooked. Let's make it official. That subscribe button costs you nothing, but it helps us get these critical documentaries in front of the people who need to see them most. It's important. Perhaps the most bizarre and infuriating story of collapse comes from the Texas Hill Country, Medina Lake. Built in 1913, it was once the largest dam in Texas and the fourth largest in the entire United States. A marvel of private engineering. In early June 2026, Medina Lake hit a staggering 3.9% capacity. But it's not just the drought that's killing this lake. It's the ground beneath it. The Medina Dam was built directly on top of the Glen Rose limestone outcrop of the Edwards Aquifer. It's a porous, fractured, honeycombed rock formation. From the very beginning, the lake was a giant leaky sieve. It was physically incapable of holding water long-term. A huge portion of its volume has always bled directly into the aquifer below, a fact the original engineers knew and largely ignored. But the insanity doesn't stop there. The water that is released from the dam for agricultural use enters a system of irrigation canals that are over 110 years old. These are not modern, concrete-lined aqueducts. They are largely earthen ditches carved into the ground a century ago. The entity that manages them, the Bexar Medina Atascosa County's Water Control and Improvement District No. 1, or BMA, oversees a system so decrepit that by their own admission, an estimated 75% of the water released from the dam is lost. It seeps into the ground through the leaky canals before ever reaching the single farmer it was intended for. 75%. For every 4 gallons released, 3 are wasted. It's a system designed for failure. And now, in the face of a historic drought, that engineered failure has become a full-blown catastrophe. The lake is disappearing into the ground it sits on and evaporating from the ditches it flows through. It is a 1-2 punch of geological bad luck and infrastructural malpractice. And the people who live around the lake, who built their homes and businesses on its shores, can only watch as it drains away, a victim of a crisis that was literally built into its foundation over 100 years ago. So who is to blame? It is easy to point fingers at citizens taking long showers or watering their lawns. And while residential conservation is important, it is a rounding error in the grand scheme of things. It's a distraction. The data, from the Great Salt Lake to the Colorado River Basin, is unequivocal. The vast majority of water in the American West, between 65% and 80%, is used for agriculture. We are growing water-intensive crops like alfalfa and cotton in the middle of deserts, often using century-old, inefficient irrigation methods to feed livestock or export overseas. We are quite literally draining our own survival to grow cattle feed. The laws governing this use, known as the doctrine of prior appropriation, were written in the 19th century. The first person to claim the water gets the rights to it in perpetuity, regardless of how efficiently they use it. It is a system that rewards hoarding, not conservation. Punishing a homeowner in Phoenix for having a small patch of grass while vast desert farms flood irrigate alfalfa fields is not a serious solution. It is a political deflection. The real conversation, the one that politicians and water managers are terrified to have, is about fundamentally rethinking what we grow, where we grow it, and how we value the last remaining drops of water in a drying landscape. Until that conversation happens, we are just plugging holes in a dam that is crumbling from the top down. Every new subdivision and every new alfalfa field is another straw in a drink that is already nearly empty. These 7 lakes are not 7 isolated incidents. They are 7 symptoms of the same disease. A systemic failure born from a century of over-allocation, poor planning, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the limits of a desert environment. We built cities where they shouldn't exist. We planted farms that the climate cannot sustain. We made promises with water that the rivers could never keep. And for 100 years, we got away with it. The Great Salt Lake, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, the Salton Sea, Walker Lake, Elephant Butte, and Medina Lake are the bill coming due. Federal intervention, like the billion-dollar proposal for the Great Salt Lake, or the $250 million for the Salton Sea, feels like a monumental response. But in reality, it may only be a public fund to manage the decline. Money to suppress toxic dust so millions aren't sickened. Money to compensate farmers for water they can no longer take. Money, in essence, to pay for the funeral of an ecosystem. This is no longer about saving these lakes in their historic form. It is now a desperate exercise in disaster mitigation. How do we keep Salt Lake City from becoming an arsenic-laced dust bowl? How do we keep the lights on in California when Hoover Dam goes quiet? These are the questions now being asked inside the Bureau of Reclamation and in state houses across the West. They are no longer questions of growth, but of survival. The engineering marvels of the 20th century, the dams and aqueducts that made the West possible, were all built on one foundational assumption: the water would be there. That assumption is now broken. The paleoclimate record, read through tree rings and sediment cores, shows that the American West has endured mega-droughts that lasted for decades, far more severe than the 20-year dry spell we have just experienced. What our hydrology models saw as a worst-case anomaly could in fact be a return to the region's natural, much drier, baseline. We may have built our entire civilization during an unusually wet period, an aberration, and now nature is simply reverting to the mean. If that is true, then no canal, no dam, and no tunnel can stop what's coming. The stories of these 7 lakes are a final warning. They show us what happens when the water runs out, not in a model, but in reality. Economies collapse, towns become ghosts, the air itself can become toxic. We have pushed the system to its breaking point, and now the system is beginning to break. The 2028 deadline for the Great Salt Lake is not just a deadline for Utah, it is a deadline for all of us. A final call to recognize that we cannot engineer our way out of a problem that we refuse to solve at its source. The water is gone, and it is not coming back. Not in the way we remember. Not in the way our cities and farms were built to expect. Somewhere, in a dry canyon in Texas, on a toxic shoreline in California, on an empty lake bed in Nevada, the future is already here. The only question left is whether we are willing to see it. If you believe this is a story that absolutely must be heard, you know what to do. The most powerful thing you can do right now is hit subscribe. Join